China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories: France's worst night of rioting following the police shooting of a teenager, as President Macron blames social media for inflaming the violence. Our other headlines: the EU summit in Brussels sees China dominating the agenda and a commitment to reduce dependence on Beijing. Russia hits back at Ukraine's claims that it's planning an attack on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station, calling it pure lies. And outdoor workers in Florida demand more protection as a scorching heat wave bakes the southern United States. President Macron has said rioting across France is an unacceptable exploitation of the deadly police shooting of a teenager. The president has also blamed social media for inflaming the violence after a third night of unrest, the most destructive so far. Almost 900 people have been arrested and hundreds of police officers injured during fighting, looting and arson attacks in Paris and other cities. Hundreds of buildings have been damaged and thousands of cars set alight. This all comes after the shooting of a 17-year-old who ignored police instructions to stop his car. Well, let's talk to CGTN's correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris. Ross, what else has come out of this emergency meeting between President Macron and his government ministers?
Yeah, good afternoon, Jamie. He rushed back from Brussels, the French president attending the EU summit, but was due back here for the 1 p.m. local time, a crisis meeting of the cabinet trying to deal with this issue as swiftly as possible. They held one meeting in the morning on Thursday and announced measures, and that resulted in the biggest night of protest that we've seen so far this week. And so they are hoping that they will be able to impose measures throughout the rest of the afternoon that do go some way to try to suppress these demonstrations. The violence that we have seen, the rioting and the looting has been unprecedented in terms of the background to this case. We've seen a lot of demonstrations throughout the year, if it's pension reform or strikes of that nature, but there is a real deep-seated anger underneath this issue after the killing of the teenager by police on Tuesday. Let's take a listen in now to a little bit more of the background to this story.
There was continuing rage across France over the police killing of a 17-year-old. In the capital, shops and office buildings were attacked and vehicles set alight. In the town of Nanterre, where the fatal shooting occurred, a bank was set on fire. And as Paris prepares for the 2024 Olympic Games, a blaze broke out at the swimming arena still under construction. There were similar scenes in towns and cities across the country. All this despite a heavy police presence. 40,000 officers were deployed, with around 250 injured in overnight clashes. Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne visited a police station in a suburb of Paris to express support for officers, saying she understood public anger and frustration but condemned the riots.
We will be examining all the options with the public. I'm not going to give you an answer now, but we're examining all the options with one priority: the return of Republican order throughout the country.
The unrest was sparked by the death of a teenager known by his first name, Nael. The 17-year-old was of North African descent and was shot by a police officer on Tuesday after ignoring orders to stop the car he was driving. His mother, who led a march on Thursday which was marred by clashes, says she does not blame the entire police force, just the law enforcement official who fired his gun. That officer has been charged with voluntary homicide. Through his lawyer, the officer has apologized to the family of Nael, saying he thought his life was in danger and had not intended to kill anyone. President Emmanuel Macron left an EU leaders summit early on Friday to chair an emergency government meeting, the second in 2 days.
There
is an unacceptable instrumentalisation of the death of a teenager, which we all deplore.
but this time should be about contemplation and respect. In the face of this, I firmly condemn those who use this situation and this period to try and create disorder and target our institutions.
On Friday, the UN Human Rights Office said it was concerned by the shooting, adding it was an opportunity for France to address the deep issues of racism and racial discrimination in law enforcement. Police unions have denied the force is racist. However, some lawmakers say there are questions to be answered.
Today, calm would not happen if there are no political decisions or actions. We need political actions on the question of police violence. Justice has to be served, that's for sure. There's also a systemic problem. But most of all, in addition today, there is this social misery that's amplified by inflation, by the inaction of the government on this.
Ross, what's your sense there? I mean, is further unrest expected this evening?
Yeah, Jamie, well, Emmanuel Macron has called on parents to take responsibility for their children. The president saying that a third of the 870 people who were arrested on Thursday night and in the early hours of Friday morning were young people, some of them very young, and there are reports that children aged 11 have been taking part in the looting. So the president calling on parents to try to keep their kids indoors this evening. Authorities are expecting more demonstrations this evening. However, they are bringing in some measures. A concert tonight scheduled for the Stade de France, France's national stadium, has been cancelled. A concert scheduled to take place outside the Hôtel de Ville, France's City Hall, has been cancelled. And in the last few minutes, just before we came on air, Jamie, Gérald Darmanin, the French Interior Minister, says he's calling on all prefects, so that's the top officials in each French region, to impose a ban on bus services after 9 p.m. and also calling on all tram services in all French towns and cities also to come to a halt at 9 p.m. each day until further notice.
Ross, thank you for that. We'll see you in later hours. Our correspondent, Ross Callan, in Paris. Let's talk now to Sébastien Roche, Professor of Policing at the University of Grenoble. Professor, welcome. Good to see you. Thank you for your time. First question. This isn't just about the story of Paris, is it? I mean, this is widespread across France.
Absolutely. The event started in the suburb of Paris, in Nanterre, but very soon after the shock and emotion that the young man was killed in cold blood by a police officer, then dozens of French cities throughout the country have been affected with major riots.
We understand 40,000 police officers now are deployed. I mean, you're an expert in this particular area. I mean, is your sense that this is enough? I mean, what happens if that doesn't work? Are we going to see France declaring some sort of martial law?
It's difficult to say whether it's going to be enough. Because it depends on the number of fires throughout the country. The more fires you have, the more police you need to try to contain those fires. So it depends on the behavior of the rioters at the moment. I think that 40,000 is quite a number, and I don't think that police can stop rioting. What we know from the US, from the UK and France is that rioting stops when the participants are exhausted or when they have burned all the possible targets. And usually it takes 5 days. And we are on the verge of the fourth night of the event.
Well, that's very scientific. Is this protest and rioting, do you sense, about the killing of a teenager, or is it perhaps symptomatic of wider issues in France?
It's symptomatic of wider issues. Of course, the triggering event is the death of an unarmed person that was no imminent threat to a police officer who nonetheless decided to shoot him dead. This has caused immense emotions throughout the country, but the parts of the country that are uprising in some ways, that are destroying the schools, the city halls, the buses, etc., are the poorer parts of the country, and the banlieue, as we call them in France. And in this banlieue, the police has a very poor reputation, a reputation of racial discrimination and of brutality. And this is this resentment against the police that, in my opinion, fuels the actions of the rioters.
Professor, good to talk to you. Come back on the programme when you can. Professor Sébastien Roche from the University of Grenoble. European Union leaders have pledged to reduce Europe's economic dependence on China. This is the second day of their summit in Brussels. Leaders agreed they needed to de-risk but not decouple from Beijing in the areas of economics and diplomacy. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said it was imperative to address imbalances.
It would not be in our interest in any case to decouple in view of the common global challenges that we need to tackle and our deep economic ties, so we need to de-risk. And we need to de-risk economically as well as diplomatically. Economically, that means reducing our vulnerabilities in our economic relationship. That has been the core of the discussion today about China.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Mark Webster in Brussels. Mark, what else did Ursula von der Leyen have to say?
Well, perhaps not surprisingly, Jamie, seeing two of the themes of this conference are unity and tenacity, she wanted to stress those things on which there had been agreement. So the issue on which there was complete disagreement, which is what happens with migrants in Europe, didn't get a lot of airtime. She said instead that there had been yet another ringing endorsement of support for Ukraine, and the government in Kiev had promised another $50 billion in support, another 1 million artillery shells will be sent, and they will continue, say, to look at ways where they can support the long-term security of Ukraine. But the interesting thing was this protocol on China. Now, this is the first time ever that the EU has felt a need to say anything. Now, an EU insider told me, look, they consider this a very pragmatic and constructive document. It's not one, as Ursula von der Leyen was saying, which is meant to hinder or restrict the relationship with China. But what is concerning them, they think, is that what they can see is the imbalance between the key products which are being manufactured in China and which Europe isn't making enough of. So things like silicon chips and rare earth, that's the sort of thing where they feel they could find themselves, if there is a global disruption in the supply chain, Europe would be very vulnerable. And the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, said, when he left, he said, perhaps Europe had been a bit naive in the run-up to the fighting in Ukraine, because they found themselves far too dependent on supplies of energy, particularly gas from Russia, and had a massive job trying to change around to that. So this statement about the future relationships with China is maybe going to set a new template for the way it's going. And this was the reaction from Beijing.
As you know, some in the West are hyping up the so-called cutting reliance and de-risking. These two concepts, to a certain extent, are a false proposition.
And I should say that press conference was just a couple of days ago. I'm going to persevere with Mark Webster in Brussels. Mark, it sounds like you've got the builders in behind you, but I think we'll keep going with it. Let me ask you about the EU leaders also wanting to pressure China over Russia. What did they discuss?
Well, really interesting here. Very rarely in these meetings, the 27 heads of government, do they actually ask all the diplomats to leave the area. It's the meeting room above my head here. But that's exactly what happened for the 2-hour discussion where they adopted this new position paper towards China and then went on to discuss other issues. But it has to be said, whatever was said in there, they aren't going to tell us. However, the EU leaders have made no secret of the fact they would love to have China's backing, its political and diplomatic clout when it comes to joining them and condemning what the EU consistently refers to as Russian aggression in Ukraine. Now, they don't have a great deal of leverage to deliver that, but it's very clear from their debates today that that would have been part of their thinking. If they could get that, they would be very happy. In the meantime, as I say, they're looking for a reset in terms of the relationship where on issues like climate change, they would continue to be wholehearted working together. But on other issues, as I say, Europe's starting to say, we've also got to look out for ourselves, or we could find ourselves in serious difficulties in the event, as I say, of a big global disruption of the supply chain.
Mark, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Mark Webster, in Brussels. Russia's foreign minister has hit back at Ukrainian claims that it's planning an attack on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station, calling it pure lies. Sergei Lavrov has instead accused Ukraine of carrying out what he called provocative actions at the power station. Earlier this month, the United Nations Atomic Energy Agency said it planned to increase its monitoring team at Zaporizhzhia. The IAEA has described the situation around the plant as increasingly unpredictable. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Dasha, what more has Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov been saying?
Well, the whole number of statements has been made during the press conference by Sergei Lavrov. He was, of course, focusing on these issues related to Ukraine. He has been saying that the Western countries are now seeking to freeze the conflict in Ukraine in order to buy time to pump Ukraine more with weapons. He was also addressing the issue of children in Ukraine, saying that Russia is saving those from the shelling. He also has said that 300 children have indeed been placed in families in Russia, but they have never been adopted. So he said the kids were evacuated from Ukraine, from the orphanages. A lot of comments on the grain deal, with Moscow being dissatisfied with the very fact that the part of the deal which relates to the Russian exports is not operational. And on Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Russian foreign minister has been insisting that the IAEA knows very well who is responsible for the shelling of the station, which is believed to be causing a lot of threats to the whole continent. He also has said that the ideas and allegations from Ukraine that Russia is preparing a provocation at the territory of the power plant was pure lies. Let's listen in.
The Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant has had IAEA experts there for many months. These experts send regular reports to Vienna, their headquarters. They can do this every day. This is their decision. These experts and their General Director Rafael Grossi, who visited Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, know very well who is shelling it. Recently there has been much less such shelling, but it has been quite regular recently. They know very well that this is dangerous and can lead to no good.
Dasha, are we any clearer over the role of the Wagner troops now in the Ukraine conflict?
Well, as we follow the statements coming from the Russian officials, we understand that unless those Wagner fighters do sign contracts with Russia's Ministry of Defense, they would not be able to participate in the ongoing special military operation in Ukraine. Now, the understanding is that that has been the reason why Yevgeny Prigozhin has embarked on his armed rebellion. And also, Sergei Lavrov today has been touching upon the issues related to the Wagner armed rebellion, saying that the aborted march on Moscow was just a trouble and couldn't be called anything else, just a trouble that makes Russia stronger. He said Russia emerges from any problems and troubles as such more resilient and stronger. He was also saying that the issues with regards to the work of the Wagner in Africa are directly related to the decisions that will be made by the African governments. He was, of course, referring to the governments of Mali as well as Central African Republic, where he said that there were direct contracts signed between Wagner Group and those governments. So he said it is up to them to decide. But also he was saying that the Western countries have been reacting to the aborted mutiny in Russia, saying that they have unraveled and revealed the cracks on the facades of Russian authority. He said it's yet another proof that those Western countries are seeking to defeat Russia and that they are at war with Russia. So definitely we understand that Wagner role in Ukraine could be diminished, but at the same time it's unclear how many Wagner fighters would be willing to sign contracts with Russia's Ministry of Defense.
Dasha, thank you for that. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Well, let's take you to the Ukrainian capital now, Kyiv, and our correspondent Stephanie Freed. Stephanie, what has Kyiv been saying, first of all, about Russia's plans for Zaporizhzhia's nuclear power station?
Well, Jamie, first of all, it's very important to note that these are allegations that are unconfirmed on the part of Ukraine, and specifically the head of Ukraine's military intelligence. And what he's saying is that Russia has plans to evacuate their personnel from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. As a reminder, Russia took control of that plant last spring, still in control of the plant. And there have been allegations back and forth, both sides claiming the other plans to sabotage the plant. What the head of military intelligence here is saying also is that Russia has plans to blow up the plant. Again, I'm going to say these are unconfirmed because these are serious allegations, coinciding or concomitantly a day prior on Thursday. Nuclear disaster drills were held around Zaporizhzhia, and again, the deputy energy minister of Ukraine said, well, we're assuming the worst case scenario here, and if there is a nuclear disaster at the plant, 4 regions stand to be affected. It could spread out beyond 50 kilometers, etc., etc. Again, this is being called, as we heard Dasha say, alarmist on the part of Russia. These are unconfirmed claims by international bodies. So we're waiting, watching. I've spoken with people that I know who are in the Zaporizhzhia area. They say they're not seeing any mass exodus, which one would expect if there is an alarm and an impending sabotage of that scope predicted.
Ukraine has brought the first criminal charges over the deportation of orphans to Russia.
That's right. And these are the first charges of Ukrainian prosecutors of what they're saying is that a Russian business person and 2 Ukrainian collaborators perhaps deported dozens of Ukrainian children out of Kherson. Kherson was taken control of, Kherson, Ukraine, taken control of for 9 months starting last spring by Russians. Ukraine in general, the claims of some of the people who are investigating, they're saying 19,000 or more children have been taken to Russia or to Russian-held territories. Again, this is just the start. This is preliminary filing within Ukraine, but it's coinciding with a larger investigation that's being conducted by the International Criminal Court, the ICC in The Hague. The chief prosecutor there visited Kherson as part of this larger investigation, along the same lines, obviously, of children being absconded into Russia or Russian-held territories.
Stephanie, thanks for that. Our correspondent Stephanie Fried in Kyiv. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, outdoor workers in the US say extreme heat is putting them at risk as they demand new protection.
This week on Razor, the power of red light to recharge retinal cells, and measuring the intelligence of birds by seeing if they understand magic.
Corvids use these intricate techniques or tactics of deception which resemble some of the tactics that we do.
So they're doing magic with their mates?
They do a sleight of beak, if you will.
Hello, welcome back. At least 100 people have died in Mexico as the country deals with a 3-week-long heat wave. Temperatures in some regions have climbed to nearly 50 degrees Celsius. Most people have died from heat stroke, some from dehydration. In recent days, temperatures have fallen as the rainy season begins, but authorities are still warning some cities will continue to experience high temperatures. Well, parts of the United States are also experiencing high temperatures. Outdoor workers in Florida are demanding more protection from the heat. Our correspondent Nitza Soledad Perez reports.
A group of outdoor workers, including construction, garden, and farm workers, rallies in downtown Miami to urge the local government to pass a law requiring businesses to protect employees from the heat. Some cover their bodies with white sheets to represent those who die from heat-related illness, an average of 39 workers across the U.S. each year. Many experts, however, believe the numbers significantly underestimate the severity of the problem. Lucia Kie has been working in Florida for 17 years as a farm worker. She has experienced heat illness on the job.
What employers want is for us to pick the harvest fast, but what they don't know is what's happening inside of us. We get kidney disease. We suffer horrible things out there enduring the sun, and it's unbearable most of the time. We are dying because of the heat, the stress.
These workers are asking for basic measures.
We want water, shade, and rest for all the workers that spend their days outside.
Among the provisions in the proposed legislation, the right for workers to take a paid 10-minute break to drink water and rest in the shade every 2 hours if the heat index rises above 32 degrees Celsius. Activists, union leaders, and medical professionals show their support.
Workers are at risk for injury and death. With more than 6,000 emergency department visits in Florida each year, as healthcare workers and doctors, we do our best to care for our communities, and we rely on public health measures to keep our communities healthy and out of the hospital. I'm proud to stand here today with my comrades advocating that heat standards be implemented in Miami-Dade County.
Workers are asking for action at the county level, since there are no laws at the federal level that protect them from the scorching sun.
The OSHA, our federal government that monitors occupational safety and hazard, does not have heat protection guidelines. The Biden administration has ordered for those to be developed, but it could take a decade before those come down.
At the state level, a bipartisan push for employers in Florida to meet even basic heat safety standards has failed for the last 3 consecutive years.
Other states, including California, Minnesota, and Washington, have successfully enacted heat standard laws detailing workers' protections and penalties if employers don't comply. But businesses in Florida say they will cost too much money, and the bill has stalled in the state legislature. Workers' only hope, while they wait for federal action, is to gain some kind of traction at the local level. Nitza Soledad Perez, CGTN, Miami.
Flood-ravaged Pakistan has clinched a crucial $3 billion deal with the International Monetary Fund. The breakthrough comes after the government raised its main interest rate to 22%. Pakistan's economy has been struggling since being hit by both the global energy crisis and devastating floods last year. This deal still needs to be approved by the IMF board. We'll have more of the story in Global Business Europe at 1600 GMT. Cambodia's leader, Hun Sen, has threatened to ban Facebook days ahead of launching a re-election campaign to extend his 38-year role. He said he wanted to stop posts from exiled political opponents being seen in the country. On Thursday, Hun Sen quit Facebook after the platform's oversight board recommended he be suspended for 6 months for violating its standards on violence and incitement. The Pentagon has confirmed that the Chinese balloon which flew over the United States did not collect any information. Debris collected from the balloon after it was shot down in February has been analysed by U.S. intelligence agencies. Washington had concerns it was used for spying, but Chinese officials said it was a civilian weather balloon, and the U.S. had overreacted by shooting it down. And finally, a cosmic first, an astronomical detector buried in Antarctic ice has enabled scientists to create this image of the Milky Way in a view that has never been seen before. It's composed of so-called ghost particles emitted by the reactions that power stars. This makes it the first image of our galaxy made from particles rather than waves of light. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.